The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of the biggest cross-platform, multi-application framework on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman-Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Carl-Hugo about design patterns, some of the interesting changes which are coming to .NET 6, especially those which are designed to take away some of the ceremony from developing with .NET, and his book, An Atypical ASP.NET Core 5 Design Pattern Guide. Along the way, we discussed the benefits of both vertical slice architecture and event-driven architecture, including the ability to simplify a solution down to the data contract and taking away some of the complexity in tightly coupling two services together. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So the first thing I want to say, Carl-Hugo, is thank you ever so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. A, because you're a very busy gentleman and we're all really busy anyway. And B, because, I'm on the other side of the planet to you. So thank you for clearing some time to talk with me.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So I thought before we get on to today's topic, I was wondering, would you mind letting the listeners know a little bit about you? I know off air we talked about how, titles can be a little bit difficult and describing yourself can be difficult. I appreciate that. But if you have any words, then, it might be useful for the listeners to hear them words describing yourself. If you don't, then that's also fine too.
Yes, well, I definitely don't like all titles and labels and such. But let's say to play a bit with the book title, I do have an atypical career path. So I started coding when I was a kid, like just transcribing some listing from my Cocoa to. I learned some basic, then hacked together some web pages in the 90s, and at some point went back to school, learned web development, ASP, ASP.NET, worked in a few years in a firm. I did a bachelor degree in parallel while working. Then became a freelance and now a senior solutions architect. Which is my official title. So I had the opportunity to do a lot of design and development during my career.
That's cool. I'm always interested to talk to people, regardless of where they are on the career path, right? Because the way I see it is, we all have different experiences, and we all took different paths. And someone who is really far along in their career can also take lessons from someone who's at the beginning of their career, right? Because the way that I tackle a problem may be different to the way that you tackle a problem. And so I'm nowhere near as advanced or professional as you are, Carl-Hugo, but I'm getting there.
Well, I'd like to add on this. This is very true, and that's the thing. You have to listen to everybody, like not just like the so-called experts or whatnot, like the beginners. And I saw like in a recent project, I had a lot of interns, and some of them like were very proactive in bringing ideas forward, and we ended up making a better design because, well, we listened to their ideas, and they had great ideas. As you said, I mean, everybody can bring something.
Absolutely. And like I say, I feel like everyone can bring something regardless of where they are in that career path. I've always been the person who will put their hand in the air and say, look, okay, I feel like someone's making assumptions here because I don't know the answer to this question, but you all seem to know the answer. So could you sort of tell me what the answer to this question is, and then I'll understand why we're going in this direction? And what I found is 9 times out of 10, when I ask that, hey, what does this mean? Because I don't understand it and I feel like an assumption has been made. No one knows what it sounds like. No one knows what it means. And so I feel like it's important to be brave enough to ask that question. And I found that sometimes it's the juniors who will ask that question. Hey, I've never touched this technology before. I've never worked with this technology before. For instance, why are we doing a JWT instead of a cookie, right? Cookies exist for a reason. Cookies have existed for forever, and we can do auth perfectly with a cookie. Why are we doing that versus JWT? And that gives you a chance to sort of answer the question of, well, okay, so JWTs are sort of more of a modern practice. It requires a little bit more effort, but it can, not always, but it can be a little more secure. So let's do that instead. And then you kind of go down that route of explaining something. But then, just because you are, and I'm not saying this about you, Carl-Hugo, but just because you are a senior on the team doesn't necessarily mean that you know all the answers, right?
Well, actually, I'd even add to that, being a senior don't make you have all the answer. Nobody does.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just because you are a senior doesn't mean you know all the answers, right? So, like, for instance, I have absolutely no experience with Vue.js. This is a rather trivial example, but I have no experience with Vue.js. But I've been playing with web technologies now for 10, 11, 12 years. So if somebody comes to me and says, how do you do this in Vue.js? I'm going to parrot the question right back at them. I don't know. How do you do that in Vue.js, right? And that could be a junior in that they only, I hope you can hear the body quotes, they only have a year, 2 years of experience, but maybe that year or 2 years is entirely in Vue.js. Well, they're the expert, right? Just because I'm a senior person, just because I have more years of experience, doesn't mean that my experience is somehow better or more detailed or anything. And I genuinely feel like the best way to work as a team when you're in development is to be a team, right? Yeah, someone's got to lead it, but everyone's got to help out in every which way they can, and everyone's opinions matter.
Well, exactly, and said someone needs to lead that, but leaders are not like dictators. I mean, a good leader will empower their teammates with knowledge, and I'm pretty sure that even if you never did any Vue.js, with all the experience you have in web technology, you can contribute to a web project using Vue.js. You might not program it because it's not something you know. You may want to learn it, but I'm sure that you'll find some kind of way to contribute to that project because you take knowledge and you can apply it to different technology because that's all web. So there's some similarities somewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's all JavaScript. So at some point, it's got to run in JavaScript land. And so there's only so many ways you can write JavaScript syntactically. It all makes sense. At that point, it's just which command is it? Because it's the same language, right? So which command is it to do an HTTP request? Oh, it's like this. Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'll do that. Or which command is it to update the model? Oh, well, it's like that. That's different to React, which is different to Angular. Oh, brilliant. Okay, I'll just do that then,
Yeah, and even more that like they're all over HTTP. So if you know HTTP, you know it's pretty simple. Like there's headers and there's a body. And you talked about cookies. Well, cookies are just one header. So when you start to pile up those skills or that knowledge, well, whatever the technology you're using, you can leverage that because the technology often makes those kind of thing like magical. So it's magically doing the work for you. But if you do get what the magic is, that can often help you, whatever the tech stack you're using.
Absolutely. I always explain to people that it's like once you've gotten to the point where you understand the level of where that technology sits in that stack. Let's say you're doing JavaScript, right? You understand how the JavaScript stuff is working. Like you said, go learn HTTP, or go learn how the DOM works, or go learn how the JavaScript engine hooks into the browser. And with that sort of underlying knowledge, just as you said, you can understand the thing that you are working with a little better, I feel.
Yep, totally true. I agree with you. Yeah. Well said.
Thank you very much. I don't think it was well said because I said it, but that's just my self-deprecating. I was going to say humor. We'll put that in bunny quotes. That's what we'll do.
That's good. That's perfect. I like it.
So one of the things that we're here to talk about today, Carl-Hugo, is the book that you've written. So this is a book. I'll let you describe it in a moment, but the title it's a bit of a long title, and it's an atypical ASP.NET Core 5 Design Patterns Guide. So I was wondering, could you give us an elevator pitch for the book and maybe talk about that title a little bit? I know that I wasn't expecting to see the word atypical in a book about design patterns, right?
Yes, certainly. I'll try to be concise here, but the book is pretty huge, so there's a lot to describe. It's over 700 pages. My goal was to take the readers into a journey to explore architectural techniques and principles, not just design patterns or not just the Gang of Four design patterns. Most of the design pattern books that I've bought, they are basically the Gang of Four patterns, but oriented with some technology. I do have some really good design pattern books that talks about guff. Don't get me wrong here. But this is not what I wanted to do. So I'm taking the reader through a series of subjects from some Gang of Four patterns, but I explore and re-explore them. So for example, I focus a lot on dependency injections, and I take some of those patterns, show the original way of putting them, and then I try to revisit them using dependency injection as a strong base to do DI. I also explore different possibilities and side techniques or tricks that I try to put here and there based on my experience. And I try to have the reader understand and think design, not learn magic recipes. It's really, here's how it works. And I'm trying to do that by bringing the reader inside code. Here's why, and there's a lot of step-by-steps. There's standalone chapters, but there's many chapters that are also kind of linked. So when you go through the book, certain chapter one after the other, you get that journey, from, okay, we start somewhere, then we reach that end goal there. And hopefully, that's where you understand the thinking, the thinking way behind the pattern, if this makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I've read, like you said, similarly, I've read design pattern books that are quite literally, here are each of the Gang of Four design patterns, but in C# or in Visual Basic or in JavaScript, or and there's nothing wrong with them. But they are, and I'm going to throw bunny quotes around this, just regurgitating that information without any kind of explanation as to why we're doing it or why we're learning it. But I think that having read your book, Carl-Hugo, I felt like that there was a lot of, okay, so here's a problem, and here are some solutions, and here is a widely accepted pattern for solving that problem. Let's implement that pattern or whatever and see where we end up. And like you say, the one chapter leads directly into the next. There's a chapter where you talk about the mediator pattern and then using mediator, right? The library. And then the next chapter is, so now that we know what mediator is, let's see how we can use that in conjunction with, and I felt that feels to me more like, let's build on this knowledge, almost like let's take a course, right? Because when you take a course, you don't learn things by themselves. You don't learn standalone bits of information. You learn this bit of information, and then the next piece hooks into this previous piece of information and makes your understanding better as a whole, right?
Yes, it's true. And this is also something that I try to bring forward is mixed patterns. Because patterns are often seen as kind of, from a beginner's standpoint, it's like an esoteric kind of thing that is unreachable. But actually, there are just a bunch of simple technique that when you can put together and use them. Like they're not like rules or laws or whatnot. It's just a bunch of tools that you have to learn. And when well, it's just easier. Like your life will just become easier afterward. So that's really what I try to put together, like in that journey. Like let's learn the tools and let's mix them, because that's also a feedback that I received and that I had myself when I was at that point in life to learn design patterns. Is like you learn all of those little things independently, but how do you put them together? So this is the hard part, like using one skill to do something else. This is very hard in life, and this is what I try to bring to the reader in the book.
Sure, and as someone who was reading through it, so full disclosure, I've read Carl-Hugo's book. I really appreciated that it was all sort of hooked together. But I guess one thing that listeners may be wondering is, the title says ASP.NET Core 5, right? Or ASP.NET Core, right? Do I need to know ASP.NET Core to be able to get anything out of the book? And if I do I need to know a huge amount? So let's say I'm working in enterprise and I haven't had the chance to build anything in the .NET Core or .NET 5 technology stack yet. I'm working in .NET Framework 4.6. Is there a huge amount of stuff in there that's required? Like, do I need to know lots of background knowledge about how .NET Core, .NET 5, ASP.NET Core are sort of glued together? Or is it more a case of, it's cool, as long as you know a little bit of .NET, you can carry on?
Well, if you know .NET Core or ASP.NET Core, it will help you a lot. That said, I do cover many introductory topics, but this is in no way like a step-by-step, let's learn ASP.NET Core. If you're a seasoned ASP.NET developer, like with .NET Framework, you'll most likely be able to catch up, maybe read some intro tutorial beforehand, or go hand in hand with reading the book and learning a bit on the side for the differences. But I'd recommend you to have a good C# knowledge or .NET knowledge, I believe. That will help you get the most out of it.
Makes sense, right? If the book title was Learn Medieval Pottery Practices in French, I need to know French before I can learn the medieval pottery practices, right? I need to know a little bit about it. So that totally makes sense. So yeah, if you've got a bit of .NET, you can follow along. That makes sense.
Yes. Well, it is an intermediate level book, so I like design patterns are not like beginner level, so the book expects you to have a certain knowledge, but again, I do cover a few introductory topics to kind of help the reader, so somebody from .NET Framework should kind of easily pick it up. It's not like a step-by-step, let's learn .NET Core.
And like I said, that makes sense, right? So here's the thing, right? We've talked about design patterns a lot so far, and my personal opinion is that design patterns and the solid principles sort of go really well together. So like the design patterns show off some of the really good points about solid, and solid itself, the principles of solid altogether, show off why perhaps you should use certain design patterns. That's my opinion. Everybody's got their own opinion. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like solid and design principles go together? And if so, do you cover that kind of idea in the book? For some people, it might be a case of, I don't even know what solid is. You're saying that this is a book aimed at intermediate level developers. They may, if you've not heard of design patterns, you may not have heard of solid, and that is perfectly fine.
Yes, when I explain the solid principle, I use simple but concise language. So you get you get the principles, and you can learn them while not having to bother over like overly complex language. I think this simple is worth a lot. Evident in software engineering. Especially in software engineering, simple is often gold. But yeah, so I do talk a lot about them. And the solid principles are, for those who don't know, are guiding, or 5 guiding principles. That basically it's called loose coupling. So basically, solid is loose coupling, and there are ways to help you achieve that. You said you like solid principles. I like the solid principles too. What is important is they are not laws, they're just principles. And I try also to hammer that in the book, because there's some people that really don't like them, but probably like a lot of examples that I saw is because some people do think they are laws. And if you apply the solid principle everywhere to the more than you can, you may end up with trouble, or your project may cost more to develop for unneeded flexibility. Like, I love flexibility, but sometimes you don't need flexibility. So during those times, you can say, okay, I'm knowledgeable enough to say, we won't apply this principle here because we don't need that level of flexibility. The drawbacks are okay. So this is also what is important in this, and this is how I try to approach it as much as possible. And throughout the book, I try to reference the solid principles and make parallel with the pattern we're using through the principles, and show the readers like what this pattern bring forward. And sometimes there's some negative, right? But often there's a lot of positive that the pattern bring. And I position the pattern compared to the solid principle a lot to help understand them.
I like that because a lot of the time, like you said, they're principles. They're not laws. They're not required. It's guiding advice that has been proven over time to aid in building software that is loosely coupled, that is easier to maintain. I mean, you could still make code that is loosely coupled and easy to maintain without following any of the solid principles, and that's perfectly fine. But if you follow these principles, it's a sort of a shortcut to making your code loosely coupled and easier to maintain and testable and all of the other things that Solid aims to achieve. And the same thing with design patterns, right? As wonderful as design patterns are, you don't have to use them. And even if you do, you don't have to use them absolutely everywhere, right? So like a builder pattern would likely be useless in a function that is meant to take 1,000, maybe 100,000 HTTP calls every second, and just poke at the database and say, is this record present or something, So I sometimes feel like design patterns and solid can be used to over-engineer some things sometimes.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
It is a context-specific thing, right? And so if the context in which you're building a microservice and it will take one message in and it just goes poke at something else, you may not need any design patterns there. But if you're building a multi-tier monolith application that does a whole bunch of stuff, then yeah, maybe you do.
Yes, well, I totally agree with you there. And there's two things I'd add there. First, solid, it's good. Like the solid principles are good for code, but they're also good at higher level design. Like when you design an app or a microservices system, like the single responsibility principle does apply to your microservice. It does apply to a layer. It does apply to whatever unit we're talking about when you're designing. So they can be seen or used only for what most people use them, or they are written for. So code and smaller level things, but you can use them for pretty much everything, and they apply. And as for the design patterns, like often I'm pretty sure that before learning about design patterns, like you have done stuff that were actually design pattern, but you didn't know the name, and vice versa. Like so yeah. So basically, patterns are a named technique. Learning them are great because, well, if you don't think about it and you know the pattern, you can apply it. But often you'll just do it without even knowing. Like strategy. That's, I think, the easiest one. Like the strategy pattern is something that even if you don't know design pattern, you go through a few ASP.NET core tutorial with dependency injection, you'll use the strategy pattern and you'll just not know about it.
I think that's what I really like about .NET Core / .NET 5 / .NET 6 and ASP.NET Core is that it has been rebuilt from the ground up with these design patterns in mind. That's not to say that .NET Framework didn't have these design patterns in mind, but things like you say, strategy pattern and especially dependency injection and things like that are just so much simpler now because they're built in, right? And like you say, you're using it without realizing. You're using the builder pattern. I believe it's the builder pattern, or is it the options pattern? When you're building up the options for your HTTP handlers, when you do like add MVC, and then you can build a response there and then in the startup class without actually having any controllers, and all of these patterns are just there. It's almost, I mean, it isn't exactly that, but it's almost aspect-oriented programming when you're using attributes, right? So you've got a controller, you've got an action, and you tell ASP.NET that, hey, this is a post. Well, I've got to do that by throwing on the post attribute. It's not exactly aspect-oriented, but it's kind of almost there anyway. And like you say, you're getting experience with these patterns without realizing it when you're doing .NET development anyway.
Yes, true. Well, the promise of interoperability that came with .NET Framework 1 is finally here. So there's one thing. The naming is kind of hard to follow when you're not following the .NET world up close. This will get easier now with .NET 5, 6, 7. But the .NET Core era with .NET Standard that will also disappear and all of that, it can be very blurry. And up to the new thing, like you said, .NET 6, but there's a lot of cool features coming in, and one of them is the minimal APIs. Don't know if you look at that. Like in .NET 5, they introduced the top level statement, so no more need to create the program class. You can just code right straight into the program CS file with minimal APIs. You'll be able to do that with APIs, and everything will be super simple. So this will be great for academic purposes and even to create real programs. Like I saw some people argue a bit against that MVC is more structured for a real program and so on. I love MVC. Don't get me wrong, but I think that both will have great advantages. Because sometimes, as we said, like not long ago, simplicity is often golden, right? So these will bring simplicity. You said microservices. Like you want to build a microservice. You don't necessarily want like a big MVC structure and all of that. Anyway, can't wait to try all those new things in .NET 6.
I love the idea that it's sort of stripping away that ceremony. You can put the ceremony back in if you want. You can create a program.cs and create a startup class and wire everything back in. But if you literally just want to, maybe you're just creating an HTTP endpoint to test your UI, right? Well, guess what? You can single file, there it is. There's my HTTP endpoint. And guess what? It works. And it's returning a mocked value. My UI works. Brilliant. I could just pass that down the line now for an actual proper test. Or, like you say, let's say I want to create a microservice. This microservice has one controller and it has one root and it has one thing that it does very well. Well, guess what? That's SRP right there, right? Single responsibility right there. It doesn't have to worry about how it's wired together. You can, like I say, you could put that ceremony back in. You can regenerate the files around it. But if you do a file new MVC or a .NET new MVC, the majority of the files in Program CS and the majority of Startup CS will likely be the same, right? No matter how many times you generate a new project and create new controllers and stuff. So I genuinely think it's a great idea.
Well, I can't wait to really leverage that. And you were talking about tests. The compiler should generate that program file, that program class, so you can test it. Like you can do integration testing on your minimal APIs using like the web application factory and the test server and all of that jazz. That's even better because when I tested it the last time, that was not in the previews, but this has come, I think, in RC1.
And I guess it makes it easier for folks who are new to .NET as well, right? If you're a brand new developer, you've never written any code in your life, and the thing you're learning is ASP.NET Core or whatever they're going to call it from version 6 onwards. If you're learning that, you no longer have to learn the entire technology stack and how it's all wired together. You can just focus on, okay, so if I write this controller class and I create an action method, there's my HTTP endpoint right there. You can then go away and learn how it's all wired together, but you're not having to learn the whole stack just to learn how an HTTP handler works, right?
Yes, exactly. And you create your endpoints and that's it. But the same, like, that's what I really love about those top-level statements. And at first I was not that in agreement with that. When I saw the spec at the beginning, I was like, where are we heading to? And, now I changed my mind on that one. But for example, I'm writing a blog series about how to start coding. Like it's super like 0 level, entry level. Do you want to start coding? Like the first article is what is a program, for example. So I leverage top level statement all the way. So you don't have to do anything. Like you using system, console write line, you write to the console. That's it. You don't have to create class or anything. So I'm able to organize my series by topics like if and conditionals and reading from the console and writing from the console without going into object-oriented. Because we're playing Lego here, right? So if you know how a if work, you can put that if into a method. But the cool thing is I don't have to explain to you what a class is, what a method is. I can just show you the if.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. And with the ASP.NET APIs now, that will be the same, but for ASP.NET. So once you know C# a bit, you can learn web development without knowing everything else and start building value to either yourself or your company or whatnot.
Absolutely. And there is actually, I'd never really thought about it because when I started learning programming way, way, way back in the day, I just breezed past, I've got to copy out this code, I'll change this one line. But I'm copying out 12, 13 lines of code and I'm only focusing on this one line. But there's a section in a book that I read recently called The Programmer's Brain by Felina Hermans. Apologies, Dr. Hermans, if I've pronounced your name wrong there. And in the book, Felina says that if you're looking at 13, 14 lines of code and you're a brand new beginner, how are you supposed to take that in? How are you supposed to learn all of that? And then, you realize that nothing about it is even relevant to what you're learning. Namespace, not required. Class name, not required. I don't need to know what a class is to be able to write to the console. I don't really even need to know what a method name is to write to the console. So let's just get rid of all of that to make it easier for someone to start. And then, even then, once you have started, take it all away for now because it's literally not needed. If a class doesn't exist, the compiler will create one for you. If a method doesn't exist, the method will be created for you, right? You could put all of that back in, but if you want to, you can take it all out again. I think it's wonderful.
Exactly. You can focus writing the code that you need to write and less plumbing, which is awesome. And all the rest, as you said, all the rest is still there. So if you need that full MVC framework, well, you just add MVC and start creating controllers, and why not mix both or whatnot? That's the cool thing. You pick the tool that you need or the tools that you need, and boom, you're good to go. But if you need simplicity, we have it now.
And like you say, it's all about focusing on the code that you need to write. Yeah. If you have to go file new class.cs, you got to add a whole bunch of using statements. You got to add a namespace. You got to add a class name. You got to add a method name, and then you get to the point where you're being useful because everything else doesn't matter. The rest of the stuff doesn't immediately solve the problem. So I'm all for it. I can understand why folks might be against it, but I'm all for it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And yeah, you said using. I don't remember if that made the cut for C#10 or if it would be in C#11, but there's also the global using, that you can global use a namespace and never care about it ever again in all your other files. That is something awesome too. It's okay, using system. You almost always have a using system directive in the top of every single file, because it's really rare that you don't use something from the system namespace. And stuff like that you can put as global, that will be real interesting to play with, I believe.
Imagine writing some async C# code without having to include system.threading.task everywhere, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, okay, so the tooling can do that for you too by just doing control dot, command dot, and importing it. But why should it have to?
Yes, exactly. Less is more.
Yeah, then you can focus on the important bit, which is, I said it 3 times now, but you are focusing on writing the code that's solving the problem.
Well, you're writing value. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? We're creating value, whether for our own pleasure or for our company that they make money or whatever they make, our customers to be happy with our application, whatever the reason, we're trying to create value. And writing less code to create more value is, well, that's good for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
but those who are paid by the line of code, but I don't know that many of them. So
It's also less code to maintain as well, right?
yeah,
You don't have to maintain all of those using statements. Let's say you have a custom namespace and it moves. Well, then you got to go through all. Yeah, again, the tooling will help you with it. But let's say you're not using the tooling, right? Let's say you're using Notepad or something. Because like when I learned .NET at university, the way we were taught was you use Notepad and the csc.exe compiler. So if you're going down that route, and some people do, there's nothing wrong with using Vim or Emacs or VS Code to build your code without using any kind of plugins. And if you want to go down that route, then it makes it easier for you to have to, you don't want to make a typo fix, make a typo fix somewhere and then run .NET build again, and then you get 5,000 errors simply because you changed the name of the namespace, but you haven't changed it everywhere else. So why not let the compiler do it all for you? But the best thing about it is you don't have to do it, right? It's like with any of the C# language additions. You don't have to do pattern matching. You don't have to do any of these top level using statements. You don't have to do IA sync enumerable. You don't have to do any of these things. They're there for you to use if you want to.
yes, exactly. Like, there's so many things, and like .NET is like a huge toolbox. It's like a garage filled with tools, and you just pick the tools that you want or need. And yeah, as you said, if you don't want to, you don't need to, you just leave them there and use whatever you're more comfortable with or whatever you think is better for your project. Because there's also that. Like, this is the important part. When you're building something, this is the context. Like, you cannot say this is good for everything. Well, maybe there's something good for everything, but most of the time that is not true. So you look at your project. Okay, this is the project. This is the scope. This is what we want to achieve. Then you build that using the right tools and try to be to optimize the time it takes to develop it with the quality and the everything, and you put it together, and then you're happy. Like, the faster it gets released, well, the more happy everybody is, right?
Yeah, totally. All of that being said, then, Gang of Four has I want to say 30, around 20, 30 different design patterns. Lots of other design patterns have been discovered and named since Gang of Four came out. But I guess, and this may sound like a really strange question, but do you have any favorite design patterns? Like ones where you're like, oh, I really like that I'm being able to solve this problem with, say, strategy or builder or a factory or something. Is there anything that you think, wow, I'm glad that I get to practice this pattern today? Or is it just a case of, I don't have favorites because all of them are just as good as each other?
Well, obviously it depends. Like, it always depends. You said strategy. Well, I'm a big fan of dependence injection, so strategy is clearly one very useful pattern, but it's also super simple, so you don't have to like practice strategy. Like once you get it, it's pretty simple to use. So this would be code or small scale. And the bigger scale of things, I'd say event-driven architecture. So all the messaging, like asynchronous messaging, like Kafka. Okay, Kafka is not a pattern, but is the driver, let's say, of the architecture. Or you can use Azure stuff or whatnot. But let's say event-driven architecture is something that I really like, because it's not good for every scenarios, but when you can use it, it helps break tight coupling between systems. So you move the coupling from one app depending on the other to one app depending on the data contract and another app depending on the same data contract, which is really awesome. So it opens up a lot of possibilities. So in the higher level kind of pattern, I'd say, event-driven architecture is something I really love. And in the mid, between the strategy and event-driven architecture, I'd say vertical slice architecture that I talked in the book too. Well, I talk a bit about event-driven, but it's more theoretical. But vertical slice architecture, because I love not to search everywhere for all the files or all the whatever are needed for my feature. And I love the idea of bringing all the feature together and building features instead of building a bunch of small bits divided into multiple layers. That makes our life way easier. So that would be, I think, my three patterns. So I have a small one, an app-centric one, and a system-centric one.
I like that, because I feel like the vertical slice architecture fits really well with something that's in Pragmatic Programmer, where they use the phrase tracer bullets. I prefer vertical slice architecture to tracer bullets, because tracer bullets sounds like it's a bit more violent. But they're essentially saying, build one feature of your app, a controller or maybe even just a single handler, and start there and go all the way down to the data source or to the event queue or whatever, to the end goal, and come all the way back up. So instead of building let's say you're building an API for a bookstore, right? Instead of building the entire system all at once, you build, I need a controller called books, which allows me to get a book. So I have an action method that gets a book. The action method requires calling, maybe it calls a mediator, or maybe it talks directly to the service. It doesn't matter. So then I need a book service. All I need for the book service is return a book. And then the book service maybe requires a database. So it needs some way of contacting the database to get a book. So I've gotten a book, now return that to the service. Now that I have it back in the service, maybe I need a DTO to hide some details of that book, build the DTO, pass that back to the get a book action method. Boom. You've just built a full feature from start to finish using that vertical slice architecture, using that tracer bullets idea. Rather than building the entire API all at once, you have some immediate value right there.
Yes, well, I'd even add to that. Like what you described me is a pretty complicated feature. Like you created a controller, a service, and a repository, and a database, and a DTO. All of that to get a book. What I love, and I said simplicity, is instead of that, you just get a book. I'd suggest to create the DTO because it becomes your data contract, which is the same as with event-driven architecture. Like, you know that this won't change, and when it does, well, you better tell your clients or your consumers because, well, they won't be happy otherwise. So you have that data contract, then you create the handler that go fetch that book, and you have a feature. If at some point you need to reuse or there's some shared logic, then you start with all of these independent feature and you extract a service or a repository or whatnot, and then reuse that logic. So this is really also how I like it, because what you describe is really good. Like, it's super classic example. And what I love is when you start explaining get a book in this way and you get into so many hoops, you can then stop and look and say, well, maybe my system is way too complicated, and pack that back into a small method or whatever you're using.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense, because that fits with the KISS principle, doesn't it?
Yes.
And it fits with, let's say you build a small microservice and you throw it up onto Azure or AWS or GCP or wherever you're going to host them. You want that microservice to do as little as possible because it should only have that single responsibility. But if you're going to hit that microservice a million times a second, you want the memory footprint to be as small as possible. So maybe having a service is a bad idea. Maybe you just go, here is your data repository, here are your tables, just convert the row that matches to the DTO and send it back to me. Maybe that's what you want.
Yeah, well, every system is definitely different, and that's the part that is really important. And what I feel is often that when you start building those services and repository, often you kind of get lost because you try to foresee the future and foresee what you'll need, and you end up like coding a lot of stuff that either will be bad for you in the long term or not needed, or you spend a lot of time trying to design that thing like the best as possible so you'll be able to use it later instead of just coding the feature. And I'm not saying don't use service and repository. It's not what I'm saying. Just so the listener are not thinking that's what I'm saying. I mean, everything has a purpose. Just sometimes you don't need that whole structure. You can go simple and just build, but that requires often a bit more refactoring skills. So when arrived the time where you're like, okay, I do have shared business logic and you need to move that up, that's where your refactoring skills and your knowledge of design patterns will come into play and will allow you to do that extraction and say, okay, I need a service. Then you create your service class and you're able to refactor all of those small pieces into it and etc.
Totally, yeah. Most developers aren't paid to come up with the fanciest, cleverest solution. We are just paid to solve the problem, right? And if you want to solve the problem with lots and lots of architecture and a very complicated way to solve the problem, then totally do that. Or if you want to solve the problem by injecting the repository straight into your controller and just saying, right, convert this row into this data object and send it back, then also that is a way to solve the problem, right?
Yeah, it all depends on what you're building.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, like if you're building an API, we talked API, and as I also said, like the data contract, that's the part that you want to be unique no matter how you do it. It's a C# class that gets returned to JSON. It's a whatever, how you can do it. I don't know, you're creating your open API schema somewhere. Well, that's the important part. How you reach that goal, which is the contract. So any consumer will expect this data. How you provide that data really depends on each use case. So as you said, if you want to inject your repository, and by repository, like if you're using Entity Framework Core, for example, well, it is a unit of work with repositories in it. So you inject your DB context right in, you return the right data, like the data that follows the contract. Well, can be fine. Of course, if you're building a $10 million software, maybe you'll want to do something else, but maybe that will still be fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key. Like, and often where the questions are, like, is it okay or not, is the business logic. Like, if you're doing like a facade over a database, you don't really care. I mean, there's no business logic. So you don't want 3 or 4 or whatever many layers to update every time somebody in the business wants to add a field, right? But if it's something, I don't know, a customer-facing or customer-centric app with a lot of business logic, then you have to be more careful of how you build that. Because that logic, you don't want to duplicate that domain logic everywhere. So that's where all of those patterns come into play and say, okay, let's piece something solid together so every time we make a change, we don't break everything.
And that, I think, is absolutely solid advice, if you'll pardon the pun. But what I'd like to know, before we sort of go back to talking about the book and do a bit of a wrap-up, I'd like to know, are there any design patterns or any ways of doing architecture, designing any architecture, that you looked at and went, oh, that is so clever, or that's really smart? And I feel like perhaps from what you've said earlier on, it may be event-driven architecture, but I'd be very, very interested to find out what it is. Is there anything that you looked at and went, "Wow, that's really smart," in like a design or an architecting way of working?
Well, it's very hard to say. I think the smart part is more about how people use those patterns. Like patterns are often simple. I don't think people like sat at the table saying, "Okay, let's create a pattern." It's more, "Okay, we're doing this over and over again and it works, so let's put a label on it and it's a name." I don't want to take anything back from anybody. Like there's a lot of clever people that name patterns. Like it's really not that, but I think it's how people do leverage those patterns that are the more clever part of all of it.
I mean that is indeed as good of an answer as I would have been able to come up with. Let's because we've talked about a lot of stuff today. Let's remind the listeners of the book title and where they can find it. Right.
It is an atypical ASP Net Core 5 design pattern guide.
So I know that's available on Amazon and other booksellers. I've been told that there is perhaps a second edition on the way. Is that something that's coming along? And is that targeting .NET 6 perhaps? Or is it just, hey, there's some extra things I thought of that I could throw in there?
Yes, it is true. You have good sources. We are working in a second edition, and yes, it is targeting .NET 6 and C# 10. It will be an increment over this one, so we'll obviously keep most of the content with updates. Like I want to add, for example, the relevant C# 10 and .NET 6 features that would fit in there. I'd like to update code samples, to target .NET 6. We talked about top level statement and ASP.NET minimal APIs. I'd really like to put some of that or some more of that. I use top level statement a bit in the current version. I'd like to leverage that more if I have the time to revise as much code sample as I want, because obviously like this is not my main job. So I can't spend all my time there, and .NET 6 is pretty close. So this is still something that I'd really like to put in place, like the minimal APIs. I love that stuff. And we run many surveys, and most readers wanted to see learn more about layering and microservices. So I plan on revising those chapters and see what I can do to add more value. Like I think there are still valuable chapters, but I'll try. I'll explore the possibilities there. See how I can add more on those subjects. Obviously, we're still super early now, so when you will listen to this episode, it'll be way closer to the release date. But the day of the recording, it's pretty early in the life cycle of that second edition. But these are the big line that I say I want to tackle.
That's one of the things that would make me reserved about writing a book, especially one that's on a programming topic, because like especially .NET now is going to have a yearly release, right? And so by the time that you finish writing a book, hey, the new version of the stuff is out. So you got to update it, and then once you finished updating it, hey, the new version of the stuff is out. So that's what would stop me from doing it.
Yeah, it is true. Right now, the .NET release cadence is .NET 6 is an LTS, so a long-term support version. Then 7 will be not an LTS. Then 8. So there's also that will help. And also, we also think about some other ways to maybe bring content that I'll just hint like this, but nothing yet sure or anything, so I don't want to go into details. But we started to think about ways to bring more content without like changing the whole book, because the book is technology centric. Like we're targeting a certain version of .NET, but the more .NET will evolve, I think the less the version will matter, because the patterns don't change with .NET. There's just some code samples that will change. Now with the new minimal APIs, well, there's that was not inexistent before. The top level statement, when I started writing the book, this is a fun story. It was theoretically targeting .NET Core 2. So it was supposed to be hands-on design patterns with ASP.NET Core 2.
Right.
And I thought I'd be writing that like lightning fast, and I was like, okay, and I'll skip the details. But we have more than double the page count that was planned initially, and it takes a lot of time to write a book. I've learned that. So yes, the more it goes, the more of those features that will kind of stop happening. Like the top level statement, that's a big change, but in .NET 8 or 7 or 8 or 9, chances are there won't be more like huge changes like that. So yeah, the content is still relevant no matter the technology, the version of the technology, but I will have more less maintenance to do in the code base. I think the more it goes. Well, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, less maintenance is always the goal, right?
I like sharing knowledge, and that's why I have a blog since forever. I stopped at some point, but I started back a few years ago. That's why I wrote the book, Share Knowledge and Experience. So it's just the time. Like I have so many ideas and projects in mind that at some point it's just I don't have more than 24 hours per day to like do all of that stuff.
So how can the listeners find out more about you? And you mentioned there that you have a blog. So, and I think I spotted a few references to some NuGet packages that you've authored throughout there were references in the book to a few NuGet packages and stuff like that. So where can folks find out more about all of that stuff?
Well, there's my blog for sure. There's the NuGet packages. I have a lot of packages or open source projects that I publish on NuGet that kind of evolved during the years. So those open source projects, this started like something I needed. I coded it in the open and I deploy them. There's some that I maintain more than others. People can do whatever they want with them. I believe most of them are MIT licensed, so it's like take it or don't. And besides that, there's Twitter. I'm not a social media expert. I don't tend to share my life on social media, either public or private. I don't know. That's me, but I do my best to post stuff on Twitter, like either good article that I found or retweet interesting topics about .NET, for example. Right before recording the show, I retweeted something from David Fowler from Microsoft. Always posts great stuff. So I retweeted something about the new APIs from .NET 6. And when I do blog posts, I obviously post that on Twitter as well. So I use it as an advertisement. But yeah, I do advertise there. So if you want to know more about my blog and all of that, you'll see me tweet about the article I post. Yeah, follow me on Twitter. That's probably the best.
I'll make sure to put a bunch of links to all of the stuff you just mentioned, the Twitter, the blog, the open source NuGet packages, stuff like that. They'll all be in the show notes. So make sure you click through to read those, because otherwise you won't be able to find these links and stuff.
Yes, don't be shy to reach out. Like, feel free, like, send me either a tweet or whatever, PM on Twitter, and like, usually, like, I may not answer like in the second. I think real-time communication is overrated, and people are getting addicted to it. But I do like reply to people, so feel free to reach out as well.
Well, I guess all that really remains to say, Carl-Hugo, is thank you ever so much for being on the show again. I have definitely learned a whole bunch of stuff about what's coming in .NET, and being able to reinforce the knowledge that I've picked up from reading your book. So I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the time that you've taken out of your evening to talk to us all about this. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It was an awesome show. I had a lot of fun speaking about .NET with you. It was amazing. So anytime, feel free to invite me back, and let's talk about something else in .NET or whatnot.
Most definitely, Carl-Hugo, most definitely. Yes, you can expect another invite from me. Absolutely. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
That was my interview with Carl-Hugo Marcotte about design patterns, a little on .NET 6, and his book, An Atypical ASP.NET Core 5 Design Patterns Guide. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .NETCore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .NETCore.show/subscribe for ways to do that. Or reach out via our contact page. That's .NETCore.show/contact. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.